1996, the year that Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin teamed up to make Crash Bandicoot. And indeed, the Orange Marsupial found a lot of unexpected success, spawning not one, but 2 sequels, all of which were critical and commercial successes. However, the question still remains, how well have these games aged? For my Crash Bandicoot 2 review, I criticized the repetitive level designs and plot holes in the story. So, how is Crash 3?
Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah, the orgasm. So Crash 3 opens where Crash 2 ends. The Cortex Vortex is floating through space. All seems well when the parts create a fireball to smash into the troposphere. From there ascends an ominous figure.
Free at last.
Well, thanks a lot, Embryo. Your well-intentioned actions created an even bigger problem.
A few moments later.
Nice job cutting it, hero! Or, if you'd call this guy a hero, maybe he's more of an anti-hero. Anyway, nice job cutting it, anti-hero! Meanwhile, the Bandicoots are resting when laughter resounds in the earth. Aku Aku warns Crash and Coco to immediately get into the house, for his twin brother Uka Uka is free. Uka Uka lambasts Cortex for failing.
None have dared to fail to break Uka Uka even once. But you, Cortex, you have failed me twice.
Thus revealing that Uka Uka has been the man behind the mask. Or the mask behind the man. Aku Aku rallies her troops, and Crash and Coco go off on another adventure. So overall, Crash 3 somewhat fixes some of the narrative dissonances of the second game. Crash isn't a buffoon walking straight into an obvious trap, and the story more or less is just Crash and Coco going on a time-traveling adventure to stop Cortex. However, if I haven't already hinted, it introduces some other minor plot holes. Nothing too major, but still things I took to be noticeable. First off, they kinda established that Uka Uka was the one working behind the scenes for all of Cortex's plans. But in the previous 2 games, they don't even leave a hint that Cortex was a lackey doing his master's bidding. Uka Uka seems to imply that he had other minions before, and Cortex was just another one in a long line of henchmen.
None have dared to fail to break Uka Uka even once.
Even in the previous 2 games, this was never expounded upon. Cortex always seemed to be acting on his own initiative in Crash 1 and 2, so the presence of Uka Uka feels kind of shoehorned in without a solid explanation to how he was manipulating Cortex behind the scenes. And then there's a time machine. So Cortex and Uka Uka seem to imply that their plan is basically the same as the last game, which is to make another attempt to collect the crystals to enslave the planet. Through Dr. Nefarious Tropy, they use a time machine to collect the crystals into different time periods, because I guess Crash already collected them in the present? I don't know, it's not explained too much, but what's even more confusing is the fact that Crash and Coco also use this same time machine. So how are Cortex and Uka Uka collecting the crystals? Certain villain interactions seem to show that the minions expect you to bring it to them.
Good day, mates. Dingo Dial's the name, and Uka Uka and Cortex gave me orders to bring the crystals to them during the Ice Ages. So give me the goods and shove off.
But then there are other instances where it sounds like they're racing against you.
Uka Uka and Cortex want Tiny get crystals and bring them to Big Colosseum in Rome. Crash, leave them for Tiny, or Crash get crushed.
So yeah, not as big of a plot hole as wondering why Crash trusts Cortex so easily, but still a head-scratcher that maybe needs clearing up. Generally speaking, it's not a big issue considering that this isn't a story-driven game. In fact, a good number of 3D platformers aren't. Okay, so there are some. In fact, most of the negativities I have towards are nitpicks and don't detract from what is otherwise a visceral platforming experience. Probably one of Naughty Dog's best. While the story may have some minor plot holes, the presentation has been upped a notch. For not only does introduce new characters as bosses, but it also allows the player to get to interact with each of them in between levels. In previous games, the bosses just appeared without any introduction, but Crash 3 has them interacting with you once or twice, threatening you about the inevitable if you don't let them have the crystals. Just makes you feel like you want to get to the Ice Ages to beat up Dingodile. You want to go to the Heart of Time Twister to beat the crap out of Entropy. After all their threats and insults, taking them out feels all the more satisfying.
Little skunk!
Many of the new characters introduced all seem to have their own unique personalities, and the game even adds certain touches to the old characters. Small things like Tiny Tiger speaking in the third person and Aku Aku having the ability to talk bring about more personality compared to how they were confined into simple roles in the previous two games. Aku Aku is the grandfather-like figure guiding Crash and Coco instead of just being the hit point mask from the previous games. Mel Winkler provides a soft and gentle-toned voice in order to fit the depiction of a guardian. Uka Uka is a threatening mastermind, although the game tries to make him come across as fairly comedic, especially when Cortex tries to shake him off when he's trying to possess him. Speaking of Cortex, I kind of compare the way Naughty Dog handled him to how Darth Vader was handled in Return of the Jedi, but not to the same extreme. Cortex basically becomes the right-hand man to the other villain, Uka Uka. He comes across less like the cunning evil scientist he was before and more of an annoyance or a thorn in the side. Uka Uka actually takes more of the role that Cortex once had. Clancy Brown still does a really good job as playing both of them, acknowledging that Cortex now plays second fiddle and therefore making him sound somewhat less menacing and devious.
Why must you continue to be a thorn in our side?
What? Where was I? Oh, Tiny was a good fellow. He hated everyone and everything, but a good heart nonetheless. Please be more reasonable with my minions next time.
And as for Crash and Coco, well, Crash is basically the same. The idle animations sell his personality, like how he swings his yo-yo or him doing the Crash dance. However, there are other touches as well, like whenever Crash dangles from a monkey bar, he's like, "Oh god." Or whenever he touches a pufferfish, Crash blows himself up. In fact, the death animations really do sell Crash's character. He's goofy, but he isn't overtly wacky to the point that it's childish. It sets a balance between being funny for kids and something that adults can smirk at. As for Coco, well, not really much to say about her. She just stands around most of the time and feels like a blank slate character. In Crash 2, she didn't really have much of a role, only serving to warn her brother of Cortex's true plans, but here she's just eh. But besides that, the general presentation of created a 3D platforming cartoon world that the previous two games were leaning on but didn't quite do to the fullest. Basically goes full ham. Every boss has a defining characteristic in the story and aren't just relegated to simple fights. The voice acting is top-notch, and the soundtrack is something that will forever be worth mentioning. Usually in the previous two games, most of them had levels that related to jungle themes or something to do with the natural environment. However, there's all of that out the window. The more varied level themes provide different types of musical compositions. It all sounds like a breath of fresh air from the jungle levels that the first two games had without alienating too many people. Which brings me to the gameplay of Crash Bandicoot 3. So this has either been a make or break factor for the third entry of the Bandicoot. As I mentioned before, the game features much more level designs compared to its predecessor. In fact, if you were to compare notes, most of Crash 2's themes had around 3 jungle levels, 3 swamp levels, 3 snow levels, and once in a while you had a temple or space level thrown in there for a good measure. Crash 3 also has levels that repeat, but usually they're spread apart far enough that it isn't too repetitive. Hell, some of the levels that do repeat have differences in them, such as taking place at night so they don't feel too repetitive. However, this also brings in the elephant in the room, which is the many different vehicle sections. You had jet skis, biplanes, scuba diving, motorcycles, and not to mention riding on a tiger. I would probably go out of my way to defend that these different gameplay styles don't hamper the main adventure too much, because they only appear thrice, maybe only twice. They feel relatively out of the way. However, I will admit that I did experience some issues with some of these. It's like you're playing as Crash and then all of a sudden you have to go scuba diving into the waters. Scuba diving suffers from the fact that you have to adapt to a new control map and a new atmosphere of swimming underwater compared to running around on land. The jet ski can be a bit bouncy with the fact that the developers felt like they had to simulate what a jet ski felt like, and to add to that, the camera was very fixed, so sometimes when you had to go back to look for a box, the perspective wouldn't change. And then you had the motorbike levels. Oh boy, here we go. Basically, these were my least favorite levels, considering that the turning is stiff, so it feels like you're barely making those sharp turns, and the drivers bump you around if you hit them. So more often than not, I'd hit them in the back and slow down. Thankfully the races are short and you only have to do 1 lap. But then, things like the biplanes and riding on a tiger on the Great Wall of China, they were pretty good. The biplanes has the simplest control scheme, making it easy to adapt, and, well, who doesn't love Pura? Crash 3 also expands upon Crash's moveset by giving him additional abilities every time he defeated a boss. The Super Body Slam is great for area effect when you need to break a box overseeing a pit or smashing several at once. However, it doesn't really differ from the original Body Slam besides that. The double jump and death tornado spin are useful for getting across long pits that the normal jump wouldn't cover. The bazooka is situational at best, and it breaks the game because you no longer have to spin into an enemy to defeat them. Just whip this baby out, and it takes them out for you. And the Crash Dash, which is good for speeding against the clock in time trials. For the most part, this adds to greater variety in Crash's skill set. As I mentioned earlier, the bazooka and maybe the Super Body Slam could have both used tweaking in order to make them more relevant, but this builds upon the new moves introduced in Cortex Strikes Back. Crash 3 also makes a lot of improvements to the backtracking of Crash 2. Crash 2 had you trying to find obscure ways to get the colored gems, and sometimes had split paths that required you to go backwards at certain points. While Crash 3 also has moments that are like that, they don't have you going back towards the camera ever. The colored gems are usually behind death platforms, which requires you to reach a certain point without dying. Speaking of which, I know a lot of people complain of Crash 3 being too easy, but for me it kind of felt like it was just the right amount. I died plentiful of times, especially when going down some of the death routes. However, the difficulty is more within the platforming challenges than figuring out the secret areas like Crash 2. Hell, the main path to get to the secret warp room is just to get 5 relics. A lot more straightforward than trying to find some secret passageway. Then again, sometimes figuring out these secrets in Crash 2 brought a lot of aha moments. So that kind of feeling is missed in Crash 3. And then of course, last but not least, the bosses have made more of an improvement from the last game. Crash 2's bosses are easy as pie, and here they're also easy as pie, but their strategy to beating them is a lot more creative. After beating Tiny's lame ass, Dingo Dollar requires you to stay nimble on your feet as you dodge fireballs, and wait for an opening as he blows his own cover. and after knocking him over, you run away as his flamethrower implodes, and Tropy has you standing on opposite ends of two platforms as he launches his own flurry of attacks. Eventually he tires, and you have to platform over to the other side to subdue him. Engine is same as Crash 2, except it makes more sense with Coco flying in a spaceship and making this like an Andros boss from Star Fox. And Dr. Neocortex is a major improvement from the previous game, for now it's an actual fight instead of a chase. And it's not only you fighting him, Aku Aku and Uka Uka are also duking it out, while Cortex hurls lasers and bombs your way, all the while you wait for the opportunity to spin him off his glider into the abyss below. The ending you get after beating him is actually quite rewarding, so in the faux ending, Cortex laments to himself with golden lines like this.
With a nice big drink, and a woman with nice big bags of eyes for my head.
Oh, Naughty Dog, you dirty sons of bitches. But in the completionist ending, Uka Uka and Cortex get whisked away into a time portal that takes them back to the Cretaceous period. From this, we are greeted with this image.
Give me the mask! With it I shall take over the world! Come on!
I don't know what else to say other than, well done, Naughty Dog. Well done. And that was Crash Bandicoot 3. Okay, I'll stop. Overall, the game improves over Crash 2 in almost every way. The level designs are more varied, the characterization has been increased to the point that you are now interacting with the other bosses. Pretty much all the changes from Crash 2 have been built up on in Crash 3. Is it the Magnum Opus? Well, there could have been some smoothing out with some of the vehicle sections like the motorbike and the jet ski, and some of the Bandicoot powers could have been expanded upon to be more applicable, but other than that, Crash 3 truly does shine in almost every regard and lives up to the hype of being... That was the end of the 3-year journey that Naughty Dog made with the Orange Bandicoot. What?
Start your engines! For a Sony Computer Entertainment of America production. Fasten your seatbelts for another Naughty Dog creation.
Well, and Naughty Dog sure knows how to pull tricks up their sleeves. Until next time, we'll be going over the finale of the Naughty Dog era. CTR, Crash Team Racing.